Staked to the sand, I prayed someone, anyone, might hear me before the sun claimed my life. They had dragged me out before dawn, when the desert still held a trace of cool, and tied my wrists and ankles to stakes hammered into the ground. By the time the sun broke the horizon, its heat already bit at my skin, and I knew every hour would be worse than the last. The village gathered in a wide ring around me, silent as gravestones. No one met my eyes, not even the women I once baked bread beside, or the children who used to tug my skirts for sweets. Silas Boon stood in the center, his boots planted proud, his voice booming so every ear caught the sentence. 3 days beneath the sun. Survive and you walk free. Perish and the desert proves your guilt. The people murmured not in doubt, but in obedience. It was their way, older than law, older than mercy. Ritual, they called it, though it felt more like a sacrifice. My throat burned with the words I wanted to throw back at 'em, but all I managed was a cracked whisper. I am innocent. The wind carried it off before anyone could hear it. Silas didn't stay long after that. He turned his back, and the others followed. One by one, they filed away, the sound of their boots fading into the hush of sand. In minutes, I was alone under a sky without shade, the ground already warming beneath me. The ropes cut deep as I twisted, but the knots held fast. By midday, the sun hammered me like iron on an anvil. My lips split, my eyes blurred. I tried to keep my mind sharp, but shame gnawed at me worse than thirst. What had I done but speak against Boone when he raised the tax beyond what poor folk could pay? I had called him a thief, and thieves don't forgive the truth. The desert has a way of making time stretch cruel. Each bead of sweat felt like a prayer leaking from my body. I thought of my father's farm, long gone to dust, of my mother's hymn sung at dusk, of every small kindness I had believed in. None of it mattered now. I was to be judged not by law, not by God, but by the merciless sun. As the second evening crawled near, I realized no one would come to check on me, not even to mock me. That was part of the ritual, too. The condemned abandoned, unseen, unspoken of, until fate decided. But I refused to vanish in silence. If I had to die, I'd die remembered. I whispered to the sky, to the sand, to the circling buzzards above, "Let there be a witness." And though my body shook with weakness, my heart clung to that single plea. Someone out there would see me. Someone would know I hadn't gone quietly into the dust. Because if no one saw, then it was as if I'd never lived at all. I don't know if it was the third dawn or the fourth. I had lost count of the burning hours, but I remember the sound that cut through the haze. Hoofbeats. Slow, steady, drawing closer across the hardpan. At first I thought it a fever dream, some mirage my dying mind had conjured. The horizon shimmered with heat and the figure blurred. But then a horse broke through the glare, dust curling around its legs, and atop it sat a man, slouched but steady, like the desert itself had carved him there. He reined in a few paces away, his shadow falling across my blistered skin. I blinked against the light, barely able to lift my head. "Please," I rasped. My voice was nothing but gravel. He swung down from the saddle. Close now, I could see he was broad-shouldered, though not young.
his beard flecked with gray, and his eyes carrying the hollow weight of someone who'd stared too long into death. His coat hung dusty and patched, his boots scarred by miles of road. His gaze lingered on the stakes, then shifted to my cracked lips, the ropes burning into my wrists. I thought he might spit and turn back. Most men did when they saw someone bound under judgment. The ritual was older than them, older even than their fathers' fathers. To interfere was to call the wrath of the whole village upon your head. "Best I ride on," he muttered, half to himself. Something in me broke then, more than thirst or pain. "Don't," I begged, though the word came out in little more than breath. "Please, I'm not what they say." He stiffened at that. I saw it in the set of his shoulders, the way his hand lingered at his belt. For a long moment he said nothing, just looked at me like a man staring into a mirror he'd long avoided. Finally, he knelt. The leather of his saddlebag creaked as he pulled free a knife. "Name's Elias Carter," he said, voice low, roughed as gravel roads. "War took near everything from me. Maybe I got no right to care what becomes of you, but I'll be damned if I ride on and leave another soul to burn." With one swift slice, the first rope gave way. My wrist came free, raw and bleeding. I gasped as though I'd been given air itself. "You know what you're doing?" I whispered. His eyes narrowed at the horizon, where the village lay unseen, but not far enough. "I know," he said, "and I know Silas Boon won't forgive it." The last rope snapped, and I crumpled against the sand, too weak to rise. Elias stooped, lifted me as if I weighed no more than a sack of grain, and carried me to his horse. As he set me on the saddle before him, I felt the tremor of fear under his strength. He knew the choice he'd made would turn Boone's wrath toward him, but he held me steady all the same. Behind us, the desert wind carried no mercy. Ahead, it promised none. Yet between 'em, Elias Carter chose defiance, and that single choice bound my fate to his.
Elias rode hard, the desert wind clawing at us, his arms braced firm around me. I tried to cling to the rhythm of the horse, though my body felt hollow, drained of strength. For a moment, I dared to believe the worst was behind us. Then we reached the ridge. The trail narrowed there, hemmed in by jagged rock, and waiting to cross it were Silas Boon and half a dozen men, rifles glinting in the sun. They'd been lying in wait, as if Elias's defiance were a certainty they had counted on. "Carter," Boon called, his voice smug as a banker's smile, "you spat on our law. You know what that makes you." Elias slowed his horse, steady as stone, though I could feel the tension running through him. He eased me down, letting me stand against the rock wall, though my knees nearly buckled. Then he stepped forward alone, his hands empty, no gun drawn. "That woman's no thief," Elias said. His voice carried, calm but sharp enough to cut. "But you are, Boone. Everyone knows it." The man shifted at that, glancing between their leader and one another. Boone's face hardened. "You dare?" What came next happened faster than I could follow. One of Boone's men lunged forward, swinging the butt of his rifle. Elias sidestepped, caught the weapon by its barrel, and twisted. The young man hit the ground with a grunt, his gun skittering across the dirt. Another came at him with a knife. Elias moved like a man who'd fought too many battles to flinch. He drove his shoulder into the attacker's gut, sent him sprawling, and in the same breath snatched the knife away. Dust rose, men cursed, and still Elias hadn't drawn his revolver.
He fought bare-handed, precise, every motion efficient, as if wasting effort meant wasting life. Within minutes, 3 of Boon's men lay groaning in the sand, disarmed, humiliated. I pressed my palm against the rock, torn between terror and awe. This was no wild brawl. This was survival etched into every muscle. And still, he didn't raise the knife to kill. He only broke their fight, left them beaten, but breathing. Boone's hand hovered near his holster, but he didn't draw. His eyes darted to the fallen men, then back to Elias, who stood tall, chest heaving but steady. "Go on," Elias said, voice low. "Draw if you've got the courage." Silas Boone's mouth tightened, but his hand stayed frozen. He spat in the dust instead. "This isn't finished," he hissed. Then, with a jerk of his head, he gathered his bruised men and pulled back down the ridge trail. When the dust settled, Elias retrieved the horse, helped me climb back on. His hands trembled faintly, though his face gave nothing away. "You could have killed him," I said, breathless. His gaze stayed fixed on the horizon. "Not today." And though Boone had retreated, I know in my bones the fight was only beginning.
By the time we reached town, I was half conscious, swaying against Elias's chest. The ridge fight had stolen the last of my strength. My skin was blistered raw, my throat little more than sand. Still, I felt the horse slow, then stop, and Elias's arms lift me down. I opened my eyes to see a familiar badge glinting in the sun. Sheriff Josiah Hale. Broad, weathered, his hair gone silver at the temples, but his stance still sharp. I'd known him as the lawman who kept the peace when tempers flared, but now he looked past me and locked eyes with Elias. For a moment they said nothing, then Hale's jaw softened. "Carter, never thought I'd see you ride in again." "Didn't think I would," Elias muttered, steadying me. It wasn't until later I learned they had fought together once, side by side in a war that had carved scars into both men. Their bond ran deeper than most words. Hale's eyes flicked to my wrists, the angry rope burns, the welts left by sun and sand. His expression darkened. "Boone's doing?" Elias nodded once. Hale spat in the dirt. "I knew that man stank of rot. Folks whisper, but no one dares lift a finger. He's got half the town bound by fear." He motioned us toward the sheriff's yard, a patch of shade where he eased me down onto a bench. Someone fetched water. The first sip nearly split my cracked lips, but it was life itself pouring down my throat. "You'll have to give me time," Hale said, pacing like a man already mapping the battlefield. "I can't arrest Boone without proof, but ledger trails, freight manifests, men who've dealt with him, I'll dig, and when I've got enough, I'll drag him into the square myself." Relief should have calmed me, but fear lingered sharp in my chest. "He won't wait," I croaked. "He'll come for you, for Elias, for me." The sheriff's eyes met mine, hard as hammered iron. "Let him. If Boone's dirty, we will find it, and if he strikes first, he'll find we bite back." I looked at Elias then, expecting him to protest, to say he had no place in this war, but he only nodded, quiet as stone, his gaze shadowed by memory. Whatever he had lost on those battlefields, he seemed willing to risk the rest of himself now. The desert trial had meant to kill me in silence. Instead, it had lit a fuse that could set the whole town aflame. And Silas Boon, I knew, would not forgive being humiliated on that ridge. The days that followed blurred together in the hush of Elias's small ranch house. Sheriff Hale rode in and out, chasing scraps of proof, while I was left in Elias's care, healing slow as molasses. My skin peeled where the sun had burned deepest, my wrists still raw from rope. But the worst wounds were the ones no one could see. The shame of having been staked out like a criminal, the weight of silence from those I once called neighbors. Elias didn't talk much at first. He was a man built from long pauses, his words shaped more by what he held back than by what he said. Yet in the quiet, I began to notice the small mercies. The way he set a cup of water within my reach before I even asked, or how he turned the lamp low so the shadows wouldn't remind me of the desert night. One evening, the wind rattled the shutters, and I found myself asking, "Why didn't you leave me?" My voice was barely a whisper across the table where a candle guttered between us. He didn't look up right away. His fingers traced the rim of his mug like he was steadying himself. Finally, he said, "Because I know what it's like to be left behind." The words hung there, heavier than lead. Slowly he spoke of the war, the comrades buried in shallow graves, the empty fields he returned to, the years he spent with nothing but ghosts for company. I listened, though my chest ached with each image. When he asked about me, I told him of my father's farm, how it withered when the drought came, how Boone's taxes took the rest. I confessed the foolishness of raising my voice in public, thinking truth could stand against a man like him. Elias didn't scold me. He only nodded, as if he already knew how dangerous honesty could be in a land ruled by fear. By the third night, something had shifted between us. I caught his eyes lingering when he thought I wasn't looking, saw the flicker of something fragile breaking through his guarded shell, and I, though still battered, felt a warmth I hadn't known in years, a faint pulse of trust. But peace never lasts long out here. Rumors drifted in on the wind, Boone's men riding restless, their voices loud in the saloon, their fists eager for payback. I saw Elias tense whenever a rider passed too close to his fence line. The candlelit hush of his kitchen began to feel like a fragile fort, walls too thin to hold back the storm. Still, when he reached across the table and let his rough hand rest lightly over mine, I didn't pull away. The world outside was sharpening its knives, but for that heartbeat of a moment, I let myself believe we could face it together. Sheriff Hale returned near dawn, his horse lathered, his face streaked with the dust of long miles. He didn't waste time with pleasantries, just strode into Elias's yard, a ledger tucked under his arm, and spread it across the table. "Every missing coin points to Boone," he said, voice low but fierce. "Freight meant for the town bank, gold shipments bound for Fort Bowie. Half vanished before it reached the books, and Boone's hand signs the receipts." Elias leaned in, brow furrowed. I traced the columns with trembling fingers, each false number another nail in the coffin Boone had built for himself. "Will they believe it?" I asked. My throat tightened with doubt. "The same folk who turned their backs on me?" Hale's jaw tightened. "They'll believe it when I stand in the square and read it aloud. They'll believe when they see how deep he's been feeding off their pockets." Elias said nothing, but I saw the weight settle in his eyes. He had fought wars. He knew the difference between winning proof and surviving the reckoning that followed. We made ready that same day. Hale gathered his deputies, men he trusted to hold their ground if Boone's hired hands came gunning. Elias saddled his horse, checked the revolver he'd so far kept holstered, and handed me a small derringer he claimed was more bark than bite, but better than empty hands.
I tried to steady my breathing. The thought of riding back into that village, into the circle where I'd been staked like an animal, turned my stomach to stone. But I couldn't hide in Elias's house forever. My shame had been public. The truth had to be too. "Abigail," Hale said before we left, his voice gentler than I'd ever heard it, "if Boone strikes first, I need you to stand tall. Folk will look to you to see if this fight is worth it." The idea near broke me, but I nodded all the same. We rode as the sun climbed high, dust curling off the hooves, the town's rooftops looming nearer with each mile. The weight of what we carried, ledger, testimony, hope itself, pressed heavy as any saddlebag. At the edge of town, Hale reined closer, his hand brushing mine on the reins. "We'll face 'em together," he murmured, steady as stone. I forced myself to lift my chin. If I faltered, then Boone's cruelty had won even before the first word was spoken. So I set my eyes on the square, on the place where I'd been left to die, and prayed the truth would burn brighter than the desert sun. The whole town gathered in the square, drawn like moths to a flame. I could feel their eyes cutting into me, the same eyes that had turned away while I burned in the desert. My knees wanted to buckle, but Elias's presence beside me kept me upright. Sheriff Hale stepped forward, ledger in hand. His voice carried over the crowd, firm as a church bell. "Here's your truth. Gold gone missing, freight skimmed, accounts forged, every page tied back to Silas Boon." The words landed heavy. A ripple of murmurs swept through the crowd. Fear, disbelief, then a low growl of anger rising like storm wind. Boone stood near the steps of the saloon, arms crossed, his face locked in a sneer. "Lies," he spat, "numbers twisted by a bitter old lawman and a drifter with blood on his hands." I thought the villagers might waver, might clutch to the safety of his voice, but Hale didn't flinch. He held the ledger aloft. "These are your wages, your savings, your children's meals gone missing. He's bled you dry while preaching law." The growl grew into a roar. Faces once blank with obedience, now flushed with rage. Even the men who had hammered the stakes for me would not meet Boone's eye. "Let the sun judge you, Boone," someone shouted. Others took it up until it was a chant that shook the ground. Boone's hand twitched toward his revolver, but Elias was faster, his weapon drawn and leveled, calm as if he'd been waiting for this moment all along. Boone froze, sweat beading on his brow. Then the villagers surged. Rough hands grabbed him, tore the gun from his grip, dragged him struggling toward the open stretch of sand outside the square. I couldn't breathe. It was the same walk I'd taken, the same stakes waiting in the earth. He cursed, kicked, pleaded, but the same people who had turned their backs on me bound him down without mercy. And I, though I had prayed for justice, felt a chill deeper than thirst. Watching him stretched out under that pitiless sky, I saw how thin the line was between victim and executioner. Still, when the ropes were knotted tight and the crowd turned away,
The ritual was complete. Silas Boon, who had condemned others to burn in silence, now lay beneath the same merciless sun.
The sun was sinking when it ended. Boone's shouts had dwindled to hoarse silence, his figure nothing but a shadow on the sand. The villagers dispersed like smoke, some muttering prayers, others clutching their children close. No one looked at me this time, not with scorn, not even with pity. Only silence, the kind that comes when a spell has broken and folk don't yet know what world they stand in. Sheriff Hale met us by the hitching post, dust on his boots, weariness etched into his face. "You're free now, Abigail," he said, his voice steady but tired. "Free to go where you will. But freedom carries a cost. Folk don't forget what's been seen in the square, nor who lived to tell it." I nodded. The words landed heavy, but true. I had been judged by the sun and lived, and that made me something other than what I'd been before. Elias stood beside me, his hat in his hands, gaze fixed on the horizon, as if he'd already chosen his road. For a long moment, I feared he'd ride off alone, leave me to start again with nothing but scars. But when he spoke, his voice was low, almost shy. "Hope was something I thought I'd lost forever," he said. "Turns out I found it in you." My throat tightened, but for the first time since the trial, I felt my lips curve into something like a smile. It wasn't joy, not yet, but it was the start of it. We saddled his horse, the same beast that had carried me from death to life, and climbed up together. The desert wind tugged at my hair, carried with it the faint scent of sage and dust. Behind us lay the square, the stakes, the echoes of chants that had nearly ended me. Ahead stretched nothing but open land and an unmarked horizon. As the first stars pierced the dusk, Elias shifted in the saddle, his arms steady around me. "Where to?" he asked. I looked at the fading sky, the line where night met day, and whispered, "Anywhere the sun don't rule us." And so we rode, two scarred souls, bound not by chains, but by the fragile thread of hope.